Total War Pharaoh Dynasties had its premiere on July 25, 2024. So, after more than a year after its release, what better time to publish a review of this game, especially that I recently finished the first campaign on the Middle Eastern, Northern African battlefields. That's why I want to share my views with you on said title and decided to answer the question: is Total War Pharaoh Dynasties worth playing in 2025? First, a little disclaimer. I'm a person who played all Total War games since Shogun 2, both historical and fantasy series. I've spent hundreds of hours in Rome 2 and Three Kingdoms, but the most playtime I have in Warhammer 2. Because of that, I'm well aware of what to expect from the series. I've also played the original Pharaoh, and that is why I will try to stay as much objective as possible. Do you remember how badly the original Pharaoh was received shortly after its release? Players were complaining about numerous mechanics that brought nothing to the table, a huge campaign map that looked epic at the first glance, but quickly turned into just deserts and rivers. Very little variety in factions and low number of playable ones, technical problems and issues regarding optimization, and most importantly, inadequate price to quality. This led to just around 60% of positive reviews on Steam in the first month after the game's release. So Creative Assembly tried to save the title by releasing a high tide free update, but it didn't really help. So they decided to take a step back and re-release Pharaoh with a couple of tweaks and changes, and also additional content. Most importantly, new factions like Sumerian and Aegean. And that is how Total War Pharaoh Dynasties was born. It was released as a separate game to the original Pharaoh, but it was added to the library of the owners of the original Pharaoh for free. So, everyone knows that free is a fair price, enough to bring a smile to every current's face. So, how did CA fare with Dynasties? Total War Pharaoh Dynasties campaign takes place in the Middle East and Egypt. Even though its setting is way more realistic than Troy, it is still a pretty weird choice for a CA's game, especially that we know very little about the fall of the Bronze Age, and the reasons standing behind the event are mostly speculated and a simple guessing game. The most common idea of why the fall of Bronze Age communities occurred are the Sea Peoples, mysterious people raiding coastal settlements and disrupting trade. So that is why they make their appearance in Dynasties too. Just like in Pharaoh, they are like this weird mechanic which should be challenging. The same one we know from Attila with Hun hordes, Thrones of Britannia and Viking raids, and Chaos Invasion in Warhammer titles. If you control shores, the Sea Peoples can be a little challenging, but nothing that can't be handled. But deep inland, you are not safe either. There are nomad tribes that serve the same purpose as Sea Peoples, something what devs kept from the original Pharaoh game. When it comes to factions, Dynasties has 6 cultural groups: Egypt, Hatti, Canaan, Sea Peoples, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean, so that is 2 cultural groups more than in the original Pharaoh. Mesopotamia and Aegeans were added in Dynasties. Each cultural group has a couple of playable factions. Even though they look different, they all are pretty similar and feel more like a reskin. The court mechanics work exactly the same as they did in original game. Each court has a couple of seats in it, which grant specific boons, like unique epic units for recruitment and boosts to economy. You have to rival the other factions inside the same cultural group to claim those seats and in the end become the King of Kings. There is also a mechanic of civil wars between those factions, when there are a couple of pretenders to this title. Surprisingly enough, the cultural groups where you don't belong also fight among themselves, so it is not player dependent. When it comes to diplomacy, you can still arrange adoptions, trade territories and, like in Troy, set barter agreements for a certain period of time, but it is not as in-depth as it was in Three Kingdoms. The mechanic of pillars of civilization is still present in Dynasties. Depending on how well all of the factions fare, you can either prosper or collapse. It is not only player dependent. All factions on the campaign map contribute to that mechanic. So, if you build and develop your settlements, you will lean towards prosperity, but if there are many razed or damaged settlements, you will lean towards collapse. There is also a state between, crisis. Each of those states brings buffs and debuffs with it. For example, for Babylon, so the faction that I've played with, during collapse, resource gained from raising a settlement are increased by 14%, but at the same time, replenishment rate for units is decreased by 15%, whereas during prosperity, replenishment rate is increased by 2%. It's a bit upsetting that this mechanic isn't fully in the player's hands, but I get what the CA was going for. Total War Pharaoh Dynasties suffers from something I call a Total War syndrome, which has been present for a couple of entries now, since Three Kingdoms included. So the game is challenging and requires a lot of strategical thinking for the first 100 turns, but then, when you grow pretty powerful, it gets repetitive. You fight the same enemies, only dressed in different colors, and once you become powerful enough that no one can stop you, you can just auto-resolve all battles, and the idea of playing real-time battles goes out the window. Sure, there are still sometimes some minor crises, but nothing you wouldn't be able to deal with within 10 turns. There's no sense of like sitting on the edge. In this regard, Warhammer 3 makes it better. No matter how powerful you always are endangered by a couple of factions when you can't just spam armies and be done with them because your economy wouldn't survive that. On the other hand, Dynasties is a good entry for someone who just like to conquer with only occasional challenges. To be frank, such a campaign can be actually relaxing after intense Warhammer 3 campaigns. Then, I guess, in this matter, it is highly up to you how you perceive a pretty low level of challenge in Dynasties. Whether you see Dynasties as a relaxing fun or a boring grind really depends on what you expect from Total War. Everyone who played any of the Total War series entry knows that with campaign map and strategy come real-time battles which require more tactical approach. Surprise, surprise, there are still battles in Dynasties. Let's start a breakdown with units. So there are 4 main types of units in Dynasties: melee fighters, ranged units, cavalry and chariots, which I personally put in the same bag with cavalry. There can be some hybrid units like ranged chariots. Each type of unit comes with 3 weight classes: light, medium and heavy. Light units are the fastest moving ones, but their defense and armor are very low. Heavy units are exactly the opposite of light ones. The medium ones take a little from both. All of units have their purpose. For example, spears with shields are great to hold the line and protect the flank. They are also very good against chariots and cavalry. They simply counter their attacks. However, their damage and lethality is pretty low against the regular melee combatants. You can't have everything, as they say. So there is another thing that comes with that: balance. If you think that recruiting heavily armored units is the best way to carve your way to success, you are terribly wrong. Even light units can shred the heavy ones if you use them smartly. I personally suffered terrible losses during my campaign as Babylon using heavy units against the light ones, which turned out to be very lethal and armor-piercing. Each unit has its strengths and weaknesses, and if used correctly, you can turn the loss into victory. Same goes for the topography of the battlefields. There are plenty of hills and choke points you can use to your advantage. The most unpredictable battles are sieges. There anything can happen, and a simple mistake can cost you greatly, which makes those battles way harder compared to land battles, especially if you are an attacker. If you are a defender though, you can still destroy full army with just your garrison with a little of tactical skill. When it comes to AI, it actually is pretty predictable. Most of the times it attacks from the same direction as in other battles, which means frontal attack. Sometimes it tries to outmaneuver the player and get to the archers who are safely standing behind the line of the melee fighters, but it ends up failing. Sometimes it also does terrible tactical mistakes and pulls galaxy brain moves like sending cavalry straight into spearmen. So compared to AI in Warhammer 3, it's worse, but still pretty okay. It still can surprise you sometimes, and it will definitely make the most of its unit's strengths. The dynamic of battles is basically similar to most of the Total War titles. I'm not looking at you, Troy, and this is actually fine by me, but it doesn't mean they don't get chaotic. Sometimes when your line breaks and enemy units pull over the gap, all formation can break soon after. Occasionally, your units will chase down the enemy unit, which will be chased by another of the enemy units. So things can get really crazy sometimes. There is also weather system. Storms and rains are not that terrible to deal with, they just make it harder to set enemies on fire if your archers can use fire arrows or anything similar to that, or sometimes soldiers tire faster. But the worst are sandstorms. They deal periodical damage to all units, not only yours but also enemies. This mechanic is something that I actually liked a lot. It brings me a sick joy to watch both armies get shredded by Mother Nature's might. Is there anyone left in 2025 who doesn't care for the graphics in games? Maybe some dinosaurs, but definitely not the majority of player-based community. Despite what most of the Total War community says about how visually attractive, or should I say unattractive, campaign map is, I think it actually is pretty. Maybe not breathtaking, but still pretty. The water animations and textures make hell of a work. I also like that little nice touch which are animals sitting on the campaign map if you look close enough to spot them. Another thing I've noticed is that both of the Pharaoh games are the first from the historical ones in which the campaign map is not entirely flat. Your armies can actually travel through more elevated terrains, so the graphics-wise environment does the best job. When it comes to graphics of units, they are okay, but not like super detailed. Units animations are also pretty good. Sometimes it's just nice to turn off the UI and watch how your soldiers are fighting the enemy, like in the movie. I personally also enjoy the finisher animations on the after battle summary screen. It's a nice little touch, keeping things a little bit more interesting. at least for the first couple of battles. Through the whole 70 hours long campaign, I haven't noticed any game-breaking bugs and issues. There are only two things I've noticed. First one, more common, is the fact that sometimes the loading screens after the battle take way longer than they normally do. The second thing is that when your session is very long, game might start to stutter and restarting it will be necessary. Once you do that, problem should be fixed. But overall, Dynasties are much better optimized than Pharaoh was. When it comes to UI, it's pretty intuitive, but when it's your first time launching Dynasties, it's still better to turn on the advisor that will guide you through most of the panels and explain what they are used for. Now, the soundtrack in this game is very good, but I wouldn't call it epic. It certainly gives away the vibes of the game setting with specific types of instruments used in it. The voice acting also does a great job. So the characters speak English, they do, but they have their specific accents, which I like a lot. You know, I'd hate to hear Babylonian king speak fluent English with Scottish accent.
There's no fair marking respect for the hand of the queen. There's no one to nip it yet. Ken?
Not that I have anything against Scottish. Overall, Dynasties doesn't set a new graphical standard for the series, but it's stable, nice to look at, and finally runs smoother than Pharaoh ever did. If you like to test out different mods, I have a bad news for you. Modding is present in Total War Pharaoh Dynasties, but the modding community is not as broad as in other Total War games. Maybe it's because this title had less time to gather such a big number of modders, or maybe this game just doesn't get so much attention. At the time of recording this review, the average number of players in Dynasties is around 640, so I guess we have an answer. Seems like even CA abandoned their game. The last small patch or update took place in January 2025. After that, nothing happened regarding Dynasties. This is actually very sad because I see a lot of potential in that game. Taking into consideration everything that's been said, do Dynasties have a chance of becoming constant point of interest in fans' library? Unfortunately, I doubt it. People just forgot about this title or experienced by original Pharaoh. They are not interested in giving a chance to Dynasties. That's too bad, because this game is way better than Pharaoh was. Now, the most important question for the people who doesn't own the original Pharaoh game: is this game now worth its price? Honestly, it is. With a regular price of $30 on Steam, it seems like a fair deal to me for hundreds of hours of gameplay. You can buy this game also on other online shops dirt cheap, even for $7. So after adding more playable factions, more territories and fixing the optimization issues, this is definitely a deal worth taking. For those who already got the original Pharaoh, this game is for free anyway, so why not go ahead and give it a try? So who is this game for anyway? As I said before, it all depends on what you expect from Total War game. I'd say this game is mostly for two types of players. The ones that love history, all of it, regardless how much or little we know about certain period of time. The second type is Total War fans, and I'm not talking about hardcore ones, who just love the series for their gameplay and idea. If you are a challenge seeker, Warhammer 3 will be a better option for you. So let's summarize pros and cons. For the pros, We have an interesting factions making their appearance for the first time in the series, for example Babylon, visually attractive campaign map, simple but gripping campaign, especially if you prefer not so challenging gameplay, well presented atmosphere of period of time where game is set, weather mechanics, low price for lots of content. As for the cons, we have court action mechanic without real influence on campaign, not so smart AI during battles, factions seem a little riskind, and occasional non-game breaking technical issues. So overall, is this game worth playing in 2025? In short, yes, it is. Will I be returning to Dynasties? From time to time, yes, but it won't be as often as coming back to older, historical Total War games. Once again, I'm not talking about you, Troy.